The land nobody wanted was the only inheritance nobody could take from her. Welcome. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us what part of Mexico you're watching from, or wherever you are in the world. Consuelo Vargas was 22 years old, with no family name to protect her and a sack of black bean seeds that the entire town of San Cristobal del Llano, Jalisco, had already declared as useless as the land that was going to receive them. Strangers passing through were told, with that small-town laugh that sounds like pity but is cruelty in disguise, that the orphan girl had bought the rocky plot. What no one in San Cristobal expected was that this dry, cracked earth, the land the men at the municipal office called among themselves the cursed lot, would be the only living thing for 20 miles in any direction during the worst summer any of them could remember. That March morning, Consuelo walked to the notary's desk with the 3 most crumpled bills that had ever set foot in that office. She wore no hat. She wore her dead mother's worn shawl wrapped around her shoulders like armor, and sandals with straps mended with agave twine. The notary, Don Fulgencio Ross, looked her up and down before touching the bills, with the same expression a man wears when he looks at a mistake that can no longer be undone. "This plot has been declared unfit for agriculture since 1954, he told her, adjusting his glasses on his nose. "The soil is dry clay with hardpan underneath. Nothing grows here, girl. You know that better than I do. You can see it from the road." "I know," Consuelo answered without raising her voice. "That's why I can afford it." Don Fulgencio exhaled through his nose, took the bills, and signed the documents without looking at her again. Adela Gutierrez, the municipal secretary, who was sitting in the corridor waiting her turn with a folder of yellowed papers, heard every word through the open window. And that same afternoon, before the sun went down, the whole town already knew. The orphan girl who lived in the borrowed room at Doacuca's house, the one who had worked a full year at the Estrada bakery, waking at 4 in the morning to light the wood-burning stove, had spent her last penny buying the rocky lot at the far north end of the plain. The reaction came quickly. Berta Lozano, the wife of the town mayor, said it out loud in the covered market, standing beside the goat cheese stall, in front of at least 8 people who had very good ears. A girl, all alone, with no father or mother or husband to give her guidance, spending every cent she has on rocks. That's what happens to orphan girls who don't know who to ask for advice. She deserves what she gets. No one forced her. She looked for this ending herself. And that's how she'll stay, alone, with her bad land and her broken dreams. Everyone heard it, and everyone laughed, even those who didn't want to, because a neighbor's laughter is the oldest trap in the world. Consuelo was not there to hear it. She was already walking back to the plot with the sack on her shoulder, looking at the land she had just bought from behind the loose stone boundary wall that separated it from the dirt road. What no one in San Cristobal del Llano knew was that Don Aurelio Pacheco, the oldest farmhand at the Los Sasas ranch, had walked that same plot 31 years earlier alongside a government hydraulics engineer, and that the engineer had measured something in the subsoil that was never recorded in the municipal documents, for reasons Don Aurelio never fully understood. The plot had, in its northern corner, a characteristic invisible to the naked eye. The soil changed its nature at 40 centimeters depth. It became darker, more humid, with the smell of ancient roots. There was a vein of underground water descending from the Sierra, small but constant, that never reached the surface, but did reach that depth. The engineer had said it was useless for canal irrigation. He was right. But he had never asked what would happen if instead of corn you planted black beans, which need no canal because they seek water on their own, root by root, given soil with moisture at the bottom and patience at the surface. Don Aurelio Pacheco knew this. And so, when he saw the young woman kneeling in that northern corner 3 days after the signing, opening the earth with her bare hands, with the calm expression of someone who knows what they are looking for even if they don't yet know whether they'll find it, he stopped at the gate and waited. The old man was 73 years old, with hands tanned to leather by decades of ranch work, and the habit of saying nothing until he was completely sure of what he was going to say. He watched Consuelo work in silence for several minutes. Then he took off his hat. "What are you looking for in that corner?" he asked at last. "Moisture," said Consuelo, without turning around. Don Aurelio stood still for a moment. Then he opened the gate and came in. "Come with me," he said. "God willing, I'm going to show you something that's not in any document in this town." He led her to the exact spot he remembered. With his walking stick, he pointed to the space between 2 large stones that no one had moved in decades. He told her to drive the shovel in there, and to do it slowly, without rushing. Consuelo drove the shovel in. At 35 centimeters, the earth changed. It became dark, dense, with that humid texture that has nothing to do with the gray hardpan covering everything else, with the smell of living soil. Don Aurelio smiled. "There's a vein running down from the Sierra," he explained, with the calm of someone who has kept something for a long time and can finally give it away. Small, but it never dries up. The engineer who came from the government in 73 measured all of this and said it was useless because it couldn't fill a canal. But that man knew nothing about black beans. Miss, black beans don't need a canal. Black beans find the water on their own, root by root, if you give them deep soil and don't drown them with surface irrigation that dries out the top layer before the root can reach where it needs to go. Consuelo stayed on her knees, shovel in hand, looking at the dark earth between her fingers. Something inside her finally sat down for the first time in a long while. "How many beans do you think this land can hold?" she asked, and the words came out quieter than she intended. Don Aurelio looked the plot over from end to end, calculated in silence with that old arithmetic that needs no paper, and said a number. It was a number that justified every crumpled peso she had left on the notary's table. That night, Consuelo returned to Doacuca's room and pulled from beneath the cot the little wooden box she had carried since the age of 12, since her mother died in a room at a Guadalajara hospital, with nothing left to give her. The box was fastened with a rusted metal clasp. Inside, between a dark wood rosary and an embroidered handkerchief, was a brown paper envelope with a note written in the shaky handwriting of her mother's final days, for when you don't know what to do with the land. Consuelo had always thought it was a metaphor, that her mother was talking about life, not real earth. Now she understood it differently. Inside the envelope was a paper folded in 4, yellowed, with a date written by hand, April 11th, 1961. It was a letter from her grandfather, a man who had died long before she was born, addressed to no one in particular, describing a plot of land north of the town of San Cristobal del Llano in words that were almost identical to the ones Don Aurelio had used that afternoon. Deep moisture, black beans, the water vein descending from the Sierra. Her grandfather had been the original owner of that plot. He had lost it to a debt in the 50s, and he had described it as though someday someone of his blood would need to know what he had discovered there. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from what she understood she was about to do. The following morning, before dawn, she went to Los Sasas to find Don Aurelio. She showed him the letter. The old man read it twice with a quiet expression, not interrupting, not exclaiming anything. Then he folded it with the same care with which it had been folded and handed it back to her. "Keep it safe," he said. "You're going to need it." and don't show it to anyone yet. They began that same week. Don Aurelio taught her the exact method. The deep furrow, 40 centimeters, no more, no less. The seed placed by hand, spaced precisely, covered with loose earth that would cradle rather than crush. He taught her to read the color of the morning soil, when the underground moisture briefly showed itself before the sun evaporated it, to know which parts of the plot had a stronger vein and which needed a deeper furrow. He taught her not to water from above, to let the roots work alone, to trust what was below even when everything above looked dry. Consuelo arrived at the plot before dawn, when the sky still held that dark blue that comes before light, and planted until her shoulders burned. The routine settled in on its own. She came with clay pot coffee in a ceramic mug she borrowed from Doa Kuka, set it on the large stone that served as a table, tied her mother's shawl around her waist to keep her hands free, and opened the first furrow of the day. The next morning, the same, and the one after. Her mother's shawl was the second object that was always there. Sometimes she wore it over her shoulders on cold mornings, sometimes folded at her waist. She never left it at Doa Kuka's room when she went to the plot, because it was the closest thing to company she had in those silent hours before the world woke up. She emptied the seed sack little by little, carefully, counting what went into each furrow, keeping track in her head of what remained. Don Aurelio came every 2 or 3 days. He arrived without announcing himself, opened the gate, walked among the furrows with his stick for a while, then sat on the large stone and drank the coffee Consuelo offered him from the ceramic mug, without him having to ask. They talked little, only what was necessary. The old man would sometimes point out a furrow that needed adjusting, a seedling showing something interesting, a spot in the plot where the underground moisture ran stronger, and Consuelo listened with the attention of someone who knows that what they are learning will not be taught twice. One April morning, Don Aurelio arrived with an old nanny goat tied on a rope, thin, with drooping ears. "I'll leave Blanca here for a few days," he said, without further explanation. "She eats what's no good in the furrow and saves you work." The goat was named Blanca, but was nearly gray, and from that day on the plot had sound. That same evening, Doa Kuka arrived with freshly made tortillas and a mug of atole, and said she wanted no explanation and no money, only that Consuelo eat something decent. Consuelo sat in the dirt with her back against the boundary wall and ate with her eyes closed. And before the sun went down, a neighbor from the Mesquite Quarter whom Consuelo barely knew stopped on the dirt road and called out from beyond the gate, "Is it true you're planting black beans in there?" Consuelo said yes. The woman looked at her for a moment. "God willing it goes well for you," she said, and kept walking. She was the first person in town who did not laugh. Something inside Consuelo finally sat down for the first time in a long while. The town watched her pass with the shovel on her shoulder and her sandals full of dust from the dirt road, and the comments kept coming. Eugenio Vizquez, eldest son of the family that owned the mill, and the biggest pride in the whole ejido, said it to her face one day on the main street. With 4 people present, and without lowering his voice, still at it out there on the rocky lot, "Consuelo? My father told me that land won't even grow a huizake shrub. When your determination runs out and you want to sell, let me know. I'll buy it for what it's worth. And what it's worth, so you don't get your hopes up, is the same thing you paid for it. Nothing." Consuelo looked at him, said nothing, kept walking. The next morning, before dawn, she kept planting. What she still did not know was that this summer was going to be unlike any other in living memory in San Cristobal del Llano. Without imagining that the drought bearing down on them was going to turn her land into the only thing left standing when everything else fell. The rains did not come in June, nor in July. By August, the town's wells were dropping, and the men gathered in the chapel courtyard every Sunday with long faces. The Visquez fields, the biggest and most boasted about in the whole region, began drying out from the edges inward. The corn bent over before it could form an ear. The Estradas lost half their apple orchard, the trees with curled leaves, and the dull color of a tree giving up. The town mayor went to Guadalajara to speak with officials who told him the drought was regional and there was not much to do but wait for the September rains. But Consuelo knew nothing of that. She was at the plot. But Consuelo did not know that the black bean plants beginning to show themselves in the northern corner of the rocky lot held something that was going to change everything the town thought of her and of the land she had bought. The seedlings had come up slowly, without announcement, with the small, dark leaves that black beans have when they first enter the world. They were not yet abundant, but they were alive. And while the whole plain turned yellow and brittle under the vertical August sun, on Consuelo Vargas's plot the earth kept doing what the underground vein allowed it to do: sustain life. The roots had reached where they needed to reach. The moisture below had received them without anyone having to bring water from anywhere. Consuelo looked at them every morning with the same attention with which you watch over someone you care for. She spoke to them sometimes, very quietly, while she weeded by hand between the furrows. She told them to keep going. What she did not say aloud, but felt every time she straightened up and looked at the yellow plain beyond the boundary wall, was that she was afraid, the fear of a person who bet everything they had and does not yet know whether they won. But Consuelo did not know that those plants held something that was going to change everything the town thought of her and of the land she had bought. One September afternoon, Don Aurelio arrived at the plot with a quicker step than usual. The goat Blanca was still tied to the gate. He went around her, came in, and walked among the plants with his stick, counting pods, observing the weight of each plant, examining the leaves with his fingers. He stopped several times. He calculated. And when he finished his survey, he stood in front of Consuelo and told her a number she was not expecting. "It's not the Los Sauces harvest," the old man said. "But right now, in this town, it is the only black bean harvest that exists within 20 miles. And people have been buying beans brought in from the city for a month and a half at prices many families can no longer pay." Consuelo sat down on the large stone where she kept her mother's shawl. She looked at the plants. She counted them in her mind, something she had been doing alone for weeks. For a moment, she had no words left. Something in her chest stopped hurting. She closed her eyes. And then she understood something she had already suspected but had not allowed herself to say. Her mother had known exactly what she was doing when she wrote that envelope. Her grandfather had known exactly what he had when he lost it, and she had known exactly, even without knowing she knew, that the northern corner was worth more than everything the town said it was not worth. The news traveled on its own. She was not the one who spread it. It was the son of an ejido farmhand who walked by on the dirt road and saw the green plants from beyond the boundary wall, and arrived in town saying that out on the Orphan's rocky lot there were black bean plants standing, living, with formed pods, while everything else was dead. By that point, families in town had been limiting their bean pot to 1 meal a day for weeks. The first to arrive was Doa Esperanza Ruelas, the old woman who lived beside the chapel, with a clay pot in her hands and the wet eyes of someone who has swallowed a great deal of pride in just a few steps. She stopped at the gate and called to Consuelo softly, as though calling her to confession. "Consuelo," she said, "what do you want for a little bit of beans?" Consuelo looked at her, thought, and said the price. It was fair. not revenge. It was exactly the price that let her recover what she had spent, and put some aside for the next planting cycle. Doa Esperanza did not bargain a single cent. That afternoon, 4 more families arrived. The next day, 8. Consuelo sold by measure, making sure there was enough for everyone, setting aside seed from the best beans for the January planting. Don Aurelio was there every afternoon, sitting in the porch chair he had brought from Los Saces, watching people arrive with that quiet smile that needs no words, because it said everything a long time ago, and knows that time proved it right. The Vizquez family arrived on a Thursday morning. Eugenio Vizquez, the same man who had told her on the main street that her land was worth nothing, arrived with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the ground, which is the posture pride adopts when it has no argument left. "We need beans," he said, "for the families who work at the mill." 12 families, Consuelo. "I know how many families work at the mill," Consuelo replied. "There's enough for them. Come back tomorrow with the sacks." She sold to him. She didn't charge more. She didn't charge less. She sold him exactly what she would have sold to anyone else, because the fair price doesn't change depending on who comes to buy it. Eugenio Vizquez picked up the sack, paid, and started walking. He stopped halfway down the road back, with his back turned toward her, and said in a very low voice, "What I said on the street was wrong. What I said about the land." Consuelo did not answer. It was not necessary. Berta Lozano arrived the following week with her daughter-in-law and her 2 daughters. She made no mention of what she had said at the market in front of 8 people. She only asked for what she needed and set the money on the large stone without saying the price aloud, as though paying in silence could erase something that silence cannot erase. While she waited for Consuelo to measure and pack the beans into the daughter-in-law's sack, Berta looked at the plot. The dark plants with their heavy pods, the land she herself had called useless rocks, and said very quietly, as though speaking to the earth and not to anyone in particular, "Who would have thought it?" Don Aurelio heard her from his chair. He said nothing. He only looked at Consuelo with the look old people have when they know exactly when silence is worth more than any word. People greeted her differently after that, with that quiet respect that cannot be bought with a family name or a speech. The respect that is earned with presence, with patience, with hands that don't let go when the earth is dry and the town is laughing. The families who eat at your table when you're standing are not always the same ones who stay when you fall. But the land you plant when no one believes in you, that stays. And it gives. That spring, Consuelo planted the entire plot. Not just the northern corner where the vein was strongest. All of it. Don Aurelio had taught her to trace the furrows diagonally to reach the underground moisture at more points. How to rotate sections so the soil wouldn't be exhausted, how to recognize the healthiest seeds to set aside. He taught her with the specific patience you have with someone who is going to stay, not someone who is going to leave. By the month of May, the plot had a new name. No one called it the Rocky Lot anymore. No one called it the Orphan's land. They called it Consuelo's Garden, and the land the notary had declared unfit for agriculture produced the most even and clean black beans that Don Aurelio Pacheco, in his 73 years of watching things grow, had ever seen come out of that plain. The little wooden box still sat beneath the cot. But now, beside the rosary and the embroidered handkerchief, and the grandfather's letter, there was also the deed of ownership in her name with the notary's seal and a single black bean seed wrapped in a piece of her mother's shawl. What had seemed like dust turned out to have roots that went deeper than any doubt. One Sunday in May, as people left Mass and walked slowly along the dirt road, some stopping at the boundary wall to look at the garden in bloom from outside. Don Aurelio was sitting in his chair drinking clay pot coffee. Consuelo brought him a cup, sat beside him on a wooden bench the old man had also brought from Los Saces, and the two of them looked together at the plot with its laden plants. The golden sun falling sideways across the furrows, the ranch doves perched on the eave of the new shed that Consuelo had raised in the southern corner, with lumber the town carpenter had sold her at a friend's price. Because a friend's price also changes when people decide who deserves their respect. My mother knew, Consuelo said quietly. Or perhaps she was saying it to the earth itself, or perhaps to God, who sometimes keeps things in the places no one thinks to look. Yes, Don Aurelio answered, without rushing. And you knew too. You just needed someone to tell you that you weren't wrong. Consuelo looked at the shawl on her shoulders, the same one as always. She ran her hand along it once, slowly. What if I hadn't planted it? She asked. But you did plant it, said Don Aurelio. And that was everything. That was the only thing that needed saying. Sometimes our most desperate moments are not the end of something. They are the earth being prepared for what has not yet arrived. Consuelo Vargas understood this at 22 years old. With cracked hands and a sack of seeds the whole town had declared worthless. She understood it because she didn't wait for anyone to give her permission to believe in what her own blood already knew. She understood it because she planted when no one was watching, and kept planting when everyone was laughing. And she never let go of the shovel, not when the white Jalisco sun burned her shoulders, and not when other people's words weighed heavier than any sack. Never underestimate the quiet person who keeps planting while you laugh. Because when the drought comes, she will have the only thing left standing. Do you believe our worst moments can be the beginning of something better? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss any story. Share it with someone who right now needs to be reminded that what looks like dead land is sometimes just land that hasn't found its seed yet. Until the next story, a heartfelt embrace from us to you. Consuelo looked at the garden one more time, with that quiet gaze of someone who no longer needs anyone to confirm what she already knows, and said very softly, as though speaking to the earth itself, I am from where I was loved. And this land loved me